So I wanted to go ahead today and start a little journey for myself and for anybody else who wants to join me. Um, I have, ever since becoming a guitar teacher and studying various types of music for my students and for myself, really, jazz has been a style of music that a genre of music that I have been very interested in. It's very it's not one of those that you can just easily grasp. It seems to me that it takes years to master it, and it takes years to understand it, or at least it takes you know uh, takes a little while. And I've been wanting to better myself in jazz guitar and jazz thinking, jazz playing, because it is such a, to me at least, when you're playing with other jazz musicians, it really um, has that vibe of you're having a conversation with other musicians in the language of music. I mean, it really just in your face like that. Most other styles that I have played with, uh, to me, to me, have a very, yes, there is a high level of musicality and theory to go into them. Classical music or even metal music and stuff like that. But there's also a very high level of um, thinking that goes into the performance aspect. So a lot of it turns into a performance than it does a conversation. Jazz to me tends to lend itself into that more relaxed, just two musicians talking with each other on their instrument kind of a thing, and I love that about the style. And I'm just gonna assume that's an A. There we go. And while I'm tuning, you can tune with me. What I'm doing is I'm utilizing the harmonics on the fifth and seventh. So the fifth fret of the first string that I'm using to tune, or the string that the string that I'm using as a reference to tune with, and then the seventh fret of the string lower than it that I'm trying to tune. So the only one that's different for me is the third and second string. So the third string is the string that's correct. The second string is the one that's not. I'm using the fourth fret of the third string to tune the open second string. There we go. And then I'll check it. Okay, it's good enough. Good enough. I've been watching a lot of Joe Pass videos of him actually giving instructions, and he likes to think very simplistically, or he did when he was still alive. He thought very simplistically about his playing. He didn't try to overthink things, which I love. I'm all about that. So he didn't think about in his head like complicated chord extensions or voicings. He just put everything in a category, in a family category. So dominants, um, majors and minors. And what I mean by that is every chord that he would start to play, he would just think of chords in terms of whether it was a major chord, a minor chord, or a dominant chord. Dominant chord being those kinds of chords that are basically major, but they have a flatted seventh. There's like that bluesy sound to it. But you usually hear a dominant chord right before you hear the tonic chord. It has a very nice resolution to it. Classical music did it all the time, and jazz is no different. Ooh, that sounds like it's about to go to there. That's what we call a secondary dominant, where you borrow the dominant chord from another key to go to another key. So that was moving a little too fast. So really what that was I screwed up my fingers and I made a dominant 7 out of a C chord when I was trying to make a major 7. So darn it, I gave myself away. Well, I think what I'm going to do then first is just kind of play around with the 2-5-1 chord progression and just see what comes out of it, and then kind of explain and talk about what I was doing in the process. And then what I want to do is kind of open up a bit of a discussion among you guys out there, any jazz musicians or players that would have any advice or have any 2 cents that you'd like to comment below. That would be awesome. Just to get a discussion started. Please don't start any arguments or start any violence among each other. It's not necessary. This is a conversation, an intriguing conversation among musicians. Let's keep it that way. Let's stay friends, everybody. Why can't we be friends? Anyway. I know my shapes in various positions on the fretboard. I'm not just playing in one position and staying in a box. If you're going to have a fluent conversation with somebody, you need to be able to hit the language from all aspects, from all sides, to really understand what each other's saying. And be able to hit those dialects, Oh, I noticed something else that I did, and it's more just because my fingers just like the way it feels. It's got nothing to do with the sound. This is a problem. But I'll go into the C Lydian mode for a second, as opposed to the C major mode. And all that means is the 4th note of the scale is raised a half step. And it creates a different sound. Kind of creates a different feel altogether. And that's, like I said, just more by accident. It wasn't because I was intentionally doing that. Now, every time I say take a drink. I'm going to now still play with the same chords, but I'm going to think less about scaling over them and think more about just how to and I kind of just did it. Spoilers. And just instead play with the chord shapes themselves. So kind of arpeggiate, use scale tones to get from one part of the triad to the next. So there I thought more in terms of arpeggio shapes and chord shapes as opposed to scaling around. To me, it adds a more interesting sound, adds a nice bit of color. And when you play like that and mix and match it with the more scalular type of playing, you create a whole bunch of colors in there that makes for a very happy little painting with happy little trees and yellow ochre and midnight black and all that stuff. Bob Ross fans out there? I have to watch Bob Ross videos. That's how I stay sane anymore. Okay. Do you guys remember me saying that you can substitute a dominant seventh for a minor seventh chord in jazz? We're going to do that. So we're going to turn this D minor 7 into a dominant 7. So instead of it being, it'll be this now. And then it'll move into this dominant 7 and then back into our 1. Ew, that didn't sound right. There we go. Sometimes when you just take a simple lick or something and you just move back in half steps with it, you know, then it starts to, that sounds pretty jazzy, you know, because sometimes you'll hear in jazz, you'll hear this kind of a bass note or bass movement going on. You know, it just sounds very chromatic. Well, you can just start to kind of play around with stuff like it. When I do this, my hand goes into world domination mode. Anybody who hasn't seen the John Petrucci Psycho Exercises videos, go and check those out right now so you can get that hilarious joke I just made. Anyway. Now, let's talk about secondary dominants. So like 5 of 5s and stuff like that. I'm going to add an extra chord to our chord progression. So instead of it just being a 2, 5, and 1, just so I can kind of help think of it better, I'm going to add in a 6. Which is A minor. So A minor 7. to D minor 7, G major 7, or G dominant 7, excuse me, and then C major 7. So it'll sound. Oopsies. And by the way, like I said, the dominant, it's just a fancy word for the 5th chord of your major scale. A secondary dominant is, the way I think of it, it's a borrowed dominant chord from another scale. So you're in, or from a chord within the scale you're playing with at the moment. So right now we're starting on 6, the 6 of the C major scale, which is A minor, and then going to the 2, D minor, 5, G7, back to 1, C major. Well, A is actually the 5th note of the D major scale, or even the D minor scale for that matter, but let's just think of it in terms of major right now. And all 5s tend to be dominant 7th chords in the major scale. So we could, and because of that, that's why we have a logical reason for why you can make any minor 7 chord into a dominant chord, dominant 7 chord. So logically, we could make this A minor 7. So here's how that'll sound. See there? And on top of that, you can create another secondary dominant because D is the 5th of G, which then goes back into C. So we're going to make D minor 7 into a secondary dominant, or into a D dominant 7. So here's how that'll sound all together. Now, for those of you who are more advanced players and you've learned your modes, you'll know that the 5th mode of the major scale is the Mixolydian mode, because it's the major scale with a flatted 7th, which the dominant 7 chord is a major chord with a flatted 7th. So in terms of what sort of melodies or things or scale can I use over dominant 7 chords? Well, if say you're on the A secondary dominant, just play an A Mixolydian. And then when it moves to D, move into D Mixolydian. And then when it moves to G, you're back home to G Mixolydian. And then when you get home to, then you just go right back to your major scale, which is what G Mixolydian already is, basically, right? It's just the 5th mode of the C major scale. We can also do tritone substitutions. Those are fun. Those are the chords that, yikes. Those took me the longest time to get. Just the concept of tritone substitutions. I don't know why. Just for some reason in my brain, it did not click right away. It was a disaster for me, especially in that class, that one chapter we took out of jazz theory. I think our professor was very understanding. He we all kind of were kind of like, what the heck is this? Because we're still in classical mode, and the tonal music mode and all that sort of stuff. And jazz theory kind of throws some things out the window here and there. And that's what makes it sound so jazzy, right? But anyway, tritone substitutions. So we're going to kind of, well, how can we do this? Let's stay with our 6-2-5-1 progression. A minor, D minor, G7, C. And we're going to figure out how we can substitute certain chords to make them all tritone substitutions and stuff like that. Or not all of them, at least a couple of them. So the first chord we usually start with is A minor 7, and then we found out we can make that into a dominant 7. All right. Well, a tritone substitution is a dominant 7 chord, or actually what it is a flatted dominant 7 chord. So if you're starting on A, your 6 chord, you could replace this with not an E, which would be the 5th of A, but an E flat. So it's the 5th of A, but a flatted 5th. So you're basically playing a flatted 5th dominant 7 chord from where you would usually start. Okay, that's the way I've been thinking about it all these years. So in this case, and that's the tritone substitution, from what I understand, is kind of the basis for why jazz bass movements can move so chromatically, because they're thinking in terms of tritone substitutions a lot, or well, technically we're all thinking in terms of just how cool things sound, but the logic behind it is the tritone substitution. So with that said, instead of playing A dominant 7 or minor 7, whichever one you're thinking in your head, instead move up a tritone to E flat and create a dominant 7 chord with your hand based off of that E flat. Then move down 1 fret to what would be normally D minor 7 and make that into a dominant 7 chord as well. Okay, so that's our first set of tritone. That's our first tritone substitution, moving into a secondary dominant to G. Now, instead of going to G7, we're going to make another tritone substitution. So we would normally go to G7 to end our chord progression, or right before ending our chord progression. Well, instead, we're going to do another tritone substitution. So we're going to think like this. You're starting on G, but instead you're going to move up a tritone to D flat, and you're going to make a dominant 7 chord off of the D flat. And then you're going to end it on C major 7. And thus the tension is over. It is resolved. So all together it'll sound like this. You there? Same mistake again. Sorry. Anyway. I think that's about all I'm going to cover today as far as my limited knowledge goes. Anything jazz. Everything else I just kind of play around with. Jazz for me has really been as a really kind of a novice or whatever. It's really been kind of like how a do-it-yourselfer who's trying to get into doing more projects around the house. They're they're doing a lot of trial by error. You know, hey, maybe I should try this painting technique in this room, or maybe I should try to solder this way, or is this how you solder something? Is this how you fix a sink or a faucet or whatever? And just been getting books, watching as many lesson videos as I can, but ultimately jamming. And playing with it and playing around with other people who are interested in it just like I am. And that's really, to me, that's how you develop anything, is you do it. You just do it. And yeah, if you're doing something that you're not able to do yet, make sure you're not practicing the wrong way, but you're striving for doing it better every time. But ultimately, don't worry about it. Just sit down and start doing it. You know, you'll start to notice your mistakes if you're paying attention, and you'll know what to fix as you go. And that's kind of what it's been for me. Oh, and don't be prideful. If other people have good advice to give, listen to it. Um, One of my biggest issues growing up was I just wanted to do everything myself, and that no, doesn't work. I tried. Listen to other people. That know what they're talking about. They're there to help you. Whether they know it or not. Sometimes. Okay, so like I said, any experienced jazz musicians out there that want to kind of chime in with some advice or with some comments, or just kind of join the discussion a bit into this awesome world of jazz music with me and with others watching, go right ahead. I can't promise I'll get right back with everybody. I have not been the best about getting back in touch with people lately. Life's been really crazy right now, and this is kind of one of the ways that I get to unwind a bit and just be me, with my guitar, my coffee. So I think with all that said, I'm gonna call it a day, and I'm just gonna wish you all well. God bless, Godspeed, and have a good rest of your week or weekend. I guess today's Friday, and I'll see you later.